She coded twice on that hospital bed, alone, while her husband celebrated his promotion with the woman he'd been hiding for months. But when she opened her eyes 3 days later, she didn't cry, she didn't beg, she just smiled and planned the disappearance that would destroy him completely. Keandra Williams had always been the kind of woman who carried everyone else's dreams on her shoulders. At 32, she worked double shifts as a nurse, her scrubs perpetually wrinkled from 16-hour days, her hands dry from constant washing, her feet aching in shoes she couldn't afford to replace. She'd put her own aspirations on hold, a master's degree in nursing, a promotion to nurse practitioner, even the simple dream of sleeping past 6 in the morning. Also, her husband Brandon could chase what he called our future, his MBA, his networking events, his relentless climb up a corporate ladder that seemed to have no end and no gratitude. Brandon was charming in the way that men who know they're handsome often are. He had the smile, the confidence, the ability to make you feel like you were the only person in the room. Until you weren't useful anymore, then you became invisible. Keandra had noticed the shift slowly, like watching a photograph fade in sunlight. The way he stopped asking about her day, the way he'd scroll through his phone during dinner, barely acknowledging their 6-year-old son Cameron's excited stories about school. The way he'd snap when she asked him to pick up milk or help with bedtime, as if she were interrupting something far more important than the life they'd built together. Their anniversary was coming up next week. Keandra had been planning something small, maybe a nice dinner at home after Cameron went to bed, a bottle of wine, a moment to reconnect. She'd been holding on to hope like it was a lifeline, convincing herself that once Brandon got his promotion, once the stress eased, things would go back to how they used to be. Back when he'd look at her like she hung the moon. She never got to plan that dinner. It happened on a Tuesday, one of her rare days off. She'd gone to pick up Cameron from school, feeling unusually dizzy, her chest tight in a way she kept dismissing as stress. She made it to the parking lot before her legs gave out. The world tilted sideways, and the last thing she remembered was the sound of Cameron screaming her name, his little hands grabbing at her arm, and a teacher running toward them. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics worked quickly. Advanced pneumonia, they suspected, possibly sepsis. Her body had been running on empty for so long that it had simply shut down. At the hospital, doctors admitted her to the ICU immediately. Her oxygen levels were dangerously low. Her fever spiked at 104 degrees. She was alone in that sterile room, machines beeping around her, while nurses tried desperately to reach her emergency contact. Brandon didn't answer his phone. Not the first call, not the second, not the fifth. Keandra's best friend Rochelle finally got through to him hours later, her voice sharp with panic. "Brandon, Keandra's in the ICU. They said she might not make it through the night. Where are you?" There was noise in the background, laughter, music. Brandon's voice came through irritated, distracted. "I'm in the middle of something important. Tell her I'll be there soon." The nurse who overheard that conversation would later tell Rochelle she'd never wanted to slap a man more in her entire career. Rochelle arrived at the hospital to find little Cameron sitting alone in the waiting room, still in his school uniform, tears streaking his face, clutching a stuffed dinosaur like it was the only solid thing in his collapsing world. She held him close, promised him his mama would be okay, and then went hunting for answers about where exactly Brandon was that was more important than his dying wife. It didn't take long to find out. A hospital volunteer with a penchant for gossip had seen Brandon's photo on Keandra's phone and recognized him from earlier that evening. He'd been at Marcello's, the upscale Italian restaurant downtown where reservations took weeks and entrees cost more than Keandra's weekly grocery budget. But he wasn't there for business. He was there with Ashley, a colleague from his firm. A white woman with perfectly highlighted hair, designer clothes, and a father who happened to own the company where Brandon worked. The volunteer had seen them through the window, intimate, laughing, his hand covering hers across the table. At one point, he'd lifted her hand and kissed it, while Keandra's heart stopped beating, while doctors shocked her chest and brought her back, while her son cried in a waiting room. Brandon was celebrating. He finally showed up at 2 in the morning, reeking of wine and expensive cologne, annoyed at being interrupted. A black nurse named Geneva was checking Keandra's vitals when he walked in, and she watched him approach his unconscious wife with all the tenderness of someone inspecting a broken appliance. He didn't touch her hand, didn't kiss her forehead. He just sighed heavily and muttered, "You always have to be so dramatic." Geneva had been a nurse for 20 years. She'd seen a lot, but that moment made her blood run cold. When Keandra finally woke up 3 days later, weak and disoriented, Brandon was there with flowers and tears. He played the devoted husband perfectly for the doctors, his voice cracking as he talked about how scared he'd been, how much he loved her, how grateful he was she'd pulled through. But the moment they were alone, the mask slipped. "You're being selfish," he said, not even looking at her. "I had a major career opportunity that night, a celebration I couldn't miss." "What did you expect me to do, Keandra?" My entire future was on the line. She was too weak to argue, too stunned. She just stared at him, really seeing him for the first time in years. He complained about missing work, about how Cameron had been too needy and crying all the time, about how inconvenient her illness had been. Never once did he ask how she felt. Never once did he apologize. Then Ashley came to visit. She walked into that hospital room like she owned it, all fake concern and sugary smiles, carrying a bouquet of flowers that probably cost more than Keandra's medical copay. "Oh, you poor thing," Ashley cooed, her voice dripping with condescension. "Brandon's been so worried about you. He works so hard, you know. You're so lucky to have such a dedicated man. Some women just don't appreciate what they have." Keandra said nothing, just watched, just listened, just filed every single word away. Later that day, Geneva pulled Keandra aside, her dark eyes serious and knowing. "Honey, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen this story before, and it never ends well if you stay. Don't you dare let them make you feel small. You hear me? Don't you dare." Keandra's recovery was complicated by more than just her failing marriage. The attending physician, Dr. Henderson, a middle-aged white man with a perpetual sneer, seemed determined to make her suffering worse. He dismissed her pain, reduced her medication without explanation, and spoke to her like she was a difficult child rather than a critically ill patient and fellow healthcare professional. "Patients like you need to toughen up," he told her one afternoon when she asked for a consult with a pulmonologist. "This isn't the Ritz. You're not special." Other black nurses quietly shared their own stories about Dr. Henderson, the way he questioned their competence, the way he assumed black patients were drug-seeking or exaggerating, the way he got away with it because he'd been there for 20 years and knew how to cover his tracks. Keandra, even sick and exhausted, advocated for herself. She cited medical literature. She demanded proper treatment. She refused to be dismissed. Dr. Henderson filed a formal complaint calling her hostile and non-compliant. Rochelle, who had been visiting every day, secretly recorded one of his tirades, but it was what Keandra overheard one night that changed everything. She'd been drifting in and out of sleep when she heard Brandon's voice in the hallway, low and intimate. He was on the phone and he wasn't being careful. "Just a few more months," he said. "Once she's stable, I'll file for divorce. Cameron will be fine. Kids adjust. This was always going to happen." Ashley's laugh filtered through the speaker. "Your life is about to get so much better, baby. You deserve someone on your level, someone who can actually keep up with you." "She was always going to hold me back," Brandon replied. "This was bound to happen." Keandra didn't cry. Not a single tear. She just lay there in the dark, machines beeping around her, and felt something inside her harden into steel. She picked up her phone and started making calls. First, the divorce lawyer Rochelle had recommended. Then her mother in Atlanta, a woman she hadn't spoken to in 2 years after a falling out about Brandon. Her mother's voice broke when Keandra explained what was happening. "Come home, baby. Come home right now." Then Keandra pulled up her banking app and started planning. Over the next 2 weeks, she became someone Brandon had never seen before, compliant, grateful, the perfect submissive wife. She thanked him for coming to visit. She apologized for being such a burden. She smiled when Ashley sent get-well cards signed with little hearts. But behind the scenes, she was dismantling his life piece by piece. Geneva helped her get copies of all her medical records, including the recordings of Dr. Henderson's mistreatment. Rochelle helped her open a separate bank account and carefully move money from their joint account. Every penny she'd earned, meticulously documented. Keandra contacted an old mentor from nursing school, now a director at a prestigious hospital in Atlanta. She interviewed for a senior nursing position via video call from her hospital bed, still connected to an IV, and was offered the job on the spot with a signing bonus and relocation assistance. She arranged for a storage unit, quietly packed the things that mattered: documents, photos, her grandmother's jewelry, Cameron's baby clothes and artwork. She left the big screen TV, the leather furniture, all the status symbols Brandon loved so much. When Keandra was finally discharged on a Thursday morning, Brandon was at work. Ashley had convinced him to take her to a networking lunch across town. Keandra went home, moved through the house like a ghost, packing only what mattered. She knelt down in front of Cameron, held his small face in her hands, and promised him something better. By 6 o'clock that evening, they were on a plane to Atlanta. Brandon came home to an empty house and a single envelope on the kitchen table. Inside were divorce papers, bank statements showing her contributions versus his reckless spending, printed photos of him with Ashley, and a note in Keandra's neat handwriting. "I almost died loving you. I won't waste another second." His phone calls went straight to a disconnected number. Her family blocked him. Rochelle laughed in his face when he tried to play the victim. At work, Rochelle had already sent the restaurant footage and his text messages to Human Resources. Ashley's father was furious, not about the affair, but about the liability and embarrassment. Brandon was demoted in front of the entire office. Ashley dumped him immediately, calling him not worth the drama. His friends, who'd all witnessed how he treated Keandra, quietly distanced themselves. Child Services contacted him. Keandra was filing for full custody with documented evidence of neglect and abandonment. He was stuck with a mortgage he couldn't afford alone, car payments for the luxury sedan he'd insisted on buying, and mountains of debt from trying to keep up with Ashley's lifestyle. Simultaneously, Rochelle and Geneva submitted Keandra's case and Dr. Henderson's recordings to the hospital ethics board. Within days, it went viral on medical advocacy social media. News outlets picked it up as part of a larger investigation into racial bias in healthcare. Dr. Henderson was suspended, then resigned under pressure. Multiple other Black patients came forward with their own horror stories. The hospital faced a massive lawsuit, and Keandra became the face of the movement, interviewed from Atlanta, poised and powerful and free. 6 months later, Keandra was unrecognizable, not in appearance but in spirit. She'd lost the haunted look, the exhaustion that had lived in her bones. She was a senior charge nurse at Atlanta's top hospital, respected and well compensated. Cameron was thriving in his new school, finally getting the attention and stability he deserved. Keandra had started a side initiative offering free health advocacy for Black women and mothers. Her relationship with her own mother was healing slowly, beautifully. Rochelle visited often, and they'd grown even closer through the battle. Keandra even started dating casually, though she was in no rush. She'd enrolled in a nurse practitioner program, finally pursuing the dream she'd deferred for so long. Then the letter arrived. It came from a law firm in New York. Her late grandmother, the woman who'd raised her when her mother struggled with addiction, had owned property in Brooklyn. Property she'd purchased decades ago that was now worth $2.3 million. Keandra was the sole heir. With that inheritance, Keandra paid off every debt, bought a beautiful home with a yard where Cameron could play, and established the Geneva Williams Foundation for Black Maternal Health, named after both her grandmother and the nurse who'd helped her survive. The foundation provided free health advocacy, legal support, and emergency funds for Black women facing medical discrimination. Brandon saw her on the news one evening. She was at a gala, being honored for her advocacy work, wearing a dress that made her glow, her smile genuine and radiant. He was alone in his cramped apartment, drowning in debt and regret. He typed out a message. "Can we talk? I made mistakes. I'm sorry." The message showed as read. She never responded. Cameron called his mother's new boyfriend Mr. J and barely mentioned his father anymore. Brandon realized in his small, dark apartment that Keandra hadn't just left him, she'd erased him. She'd built an entire empire from the ashes of what he'd tried to destroy, and he wasn't even a footnote in her story anymore. She didn't need revenge. She just needed to choose herself. While he lost everything chasing status and shallow validation, she built a legacy from survival. Sometimes the best comeback isn't what you say, it's who you become when they're no longer in your way. She didn't just survive the hospital, the betrayal, the racism, the abandonment. She didn't just recover, she won.